All right. I'm going to show you how I like to make my bass for my trap songs, my trap-esque songs. So, because this is intended for my Nintendo Core friends, I'm going to use Nintendo-based leads for this song. This is a Kontakt library called Super Audio Boy. If you, it's free as far as I know. I think you might have to own the full version of Kontakt though to use it, but I'm not positive. You could follow up on that. Any Nintendo synth would work, obviously. I'm just doing that for the sake of exercise. My drums, I have kick, snare, hat, cymbal. And all of this comes together to form so you know what, I might real quick, really fast, just because I'm hearing it and I'm feeling it. I'm gonna go ahead and use this just to wear down the synths. They have a little bit too more low end than I'd like them to have, so that I'm just gonna use this to roll that off. I could use a high pass filter, and I've kind of done that already, but it feels somehow like when I use the EQ, it feels a little bit unnatural. I don't know how that works, but with the Game Boy samples, at least for whatever reason, it feels really wrong. But I'll go ahead and do that, and let's get started on this bass. So first and foremost, it's very important to make sure that your kick is nice and clean on this bass, because that's really where your bass, that's like where the punch in your bass is going to come from, because you're going to be attaching the kick and the bass together in a sense. So in the same way that like your bass tone in a metal song is very essential for the rest of the mix, you know, and it's the same way that like having a really strong, powerful kick really aids in having that bass really punch through, you know. You got to do that. You got to do that in a trap-based song for sure. The kick and the bass are basically the center of your song. That's like the most important part, because you know, if you think about with the settings where you'd be listening to music like this, the bass is going to be friggin' pumping. It's going to be really loud. That's what people are going to be paying attention to. So I always throw like the sausage fattener on like a lot of my drum tracks, just because I like the aggression that it kind of throws in there. Basically just like a distortion slash compressor, you know. I don't go crazy with it most of the time. It's just like up to there. And for this, most important factor here, I have this EQ that I'm using to place a high pass filter on the kick. It's pretty subtle, but if you have headphones or speakers where you can hear that bass coming through, it's really boomy in the low end. And honestly, and obviously, when I say stuff like this, there are situations where you might want it to be super duper boomy. It's up to you, you know. But for me personally, I like to clean that part up, because it kind of like this space really should only be occupied like ever by by the bass frequencies, because the kick, the way that it like decays, the way that this particular kick sample decays, it kind of just crowds the sound of the composition, you know, if that makes sense. So I go ahead and do that, just clean it up. You can put it, you know, somewhere like that, somewhere in this area, just to kind of clear it up. So now, I haven't done anything with this massive patch. I'm going to use massive for this because I always use massive for my basses. But you can apply the same sort of thinking to other synths. You know, just use whatever I'm showing you. You can do the exact same thing with like 3x oscillator, for example, because I'm doing things that should be comparable across basically every single synth that has like a sine wave in it. You can do this with. And I've done it before. I've done it before with 3x oscillator just as an exercise, and the same sort of thinking applies. So for massive, let's see. Oh, I need to unmute it. This is what we're here. I'll go ahead and actually, you know what? No change. This is how a massive new sound starts. If you hit this and you hit new sound, this is what it sounds like right when you get it. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to a sine triangle. Make it teeny tiny bit triangle. Maybe. And then I'm going to open up the second oscillator. And I'm going to leave it as a saw. I'm just going to dial it back. And then for all of this, I'm just going to make it really low. I think I'll bring this up an octave. And this is how I always start. I saw a YouTube tutorial that talked about this, where they had this idea that they like to add a saw in, blend a saw into their bass, because then when you go over here and you apply either a scream filter, or, you know, you could also do it with like a comb filter or something, probably something that's comparable to that, or you could even just do like a low pass filter if you really wanted to. But the scream filter in Massive is really, really nice sounding, so I like to use that. But once you have that, you can see. Are these both being sent? Right, a little bit of silence here because I'm just kind of dialing it in. But so that's like that's what I'm kind of getting at. Like, you're not really hearing this saw wave over here, but it's there. It's like it kind of reminds me of, if you think about it, it's kind of like when you have like an acoustic bass. It's relatively smooth, you know, not like crazy distorted. There's like if you look at the audio waves for like a traditional bass, it kind of vibrates, like the string has like a vibration to it, and you can see it as it vibrates. And I'm kind of going for that a little bit here. That's what this kind of gives. It gives like that extra vibration underneath of it. And it sounds really, really cool. Then over here, I'm going to go ahead and have it decay. I'm going to have it be a long decay, or somewhat long decay. But I want the volume to dip with time, because it sounds right, if that makes sense. It sounds more correct. It sounds more natural. It feels, if you don't have that there, in my opinion, with a lot of songs like this, it just feels kind of off. And you're not actually going to have this volume dip in the end, because I'm going to compress the bejesus out of it anyway. So once we're here, same sort of thing that I normally do. I often throw the sausage fattener on there, you know, just because it gives me like a good place to start. But you don't have, the sausage fattener is not necessary for any of these steps. I just like it as like a first step, because it kind of makes my life a little bit easier. It's a nice, easy one knob, just push it forward kind of plugin. But if you don't want to use sausage fattener, you don't have it, you can do all the same things that I'm about to do. You just have to dial it in more. You have to spend more time messing with it. And I want to keep this video pretty brief. So, yeah, that is crazy. Okay. That's very loud. I'm going to turn it down a little bit. But that's where I'm starting at. And instead of using, because normally a lot of times I would use the distortion within Massive, and you can do that. Like, I really like the Teletube distortion, but all three of these distortions, the Classic Tube, Teletube, and Bronner Tube, are all pretty solid. These like drives, and you just kind of blend it together, and it gives it a little bit more grit, you know. But if you're not using Massive, something else that you could do is like use an amp plugin. If you have like an amp plugin, since I imagine most of us would, since we are in the Nintendo Core community, we make a lot of metal type music. If you have an amp plugin and it has any sort of bass amp presets that you can start with, or bass amp settings, almost forgot. You also have to make sure that your bass is always monophonic. I always forget to do that right at the beginning, and then I have to change it later. But that way, your notes cannot overlap, because you never want this bass to overlap. It's going to sound bad. I don't think there's any situation where you'd ever want that. But yeah. So let's say I have this like this bass amp in FL Studio. I'm sure you can do this in most DAWs, but like in FL Studio, I'm going to just dial back some of the effect of this. You know, a lot of plugins will have it built into the plugin, but you know, whatever. I like to use it right here because it's a little bit more visually representative for me. And this is basically simulating, this is kind of what I was saying before, like, if I used it in here, I'm basically doing the same thing, because I'm dialing the wetback within the plugin right here, and then the drive is, you know, like somewhere around here. Whereas in this situation, I'm just dialing the wetback right here. So the dry wet, get a little bit, instead of having it be super duper because what the big thing is, the something I've noticed is the more distortion you use, the less like really low, the less those really low tones are going to come through. So like the boomy low end, you know, that a lot of trap music is known for, you know, you're going to lose some of that clarity in the super duper low end, the more distortion that you've got generally. So you want to try to keep some of that there. Like that's what all this stuff is. Now, there's a balance to be struck here, and this is probably the toughest part of any of learning how to make a trap bass. And this also comes in where like you need to do tests on a lot of different systems. So like you might want to use earbuds for a test, you might want to use your car for a test. Obviously that's relevant with any songs mix, but with this sort of music, it's super duper important because you want to make sure that this bass can actually be heard on other systems that aren't your own. Because like mine, I have a pair of the Kali, I forget what the LP6, I think, Kali LP6 monitors. They're like, it's a relatively new company. I saw Glenn Fricker talk about it on Spectre Sound Studios. And they're pretty flat, but I can hear that low end. They're nice enough that I can hear that low end in there. And it sounds really cool in here if I have that in a song. But if you're in your car and you don't have subs in your car, like most people, if they're using like their Skullcandy earbuds and they can't hear all that, it might just be wasted. Like all that weight, all that boominess is just gone. Suddenly, you've wasted your time basically, because the only people that are going to be able to hear it are the people with the subs. So what I'm going to do is, this is where like whatever you use for your equivalent here, if you're using like a filter or something, what you want to do, you can kind of see like the EQ here. You want to kind of bring it up, because like obviously I don't want the cutoff to be like way up here where it's like distorting like crazy. Like that sounds pretty okay. Maybe a little bit. And then, if you're like, oh, but there's all these high overtones that I don't like. They sound really, really annoying. And now another extremely important detail in trap bass. I think this is relevant in all mixes, to be perfectly honest. But it's especially important in trap bass because your trap bass is probably going to have a ton of low tones that you don't need. There's this sort of phenomenon that, like, because our ears and because most systems can only play, certain frequencies, like obviously our ears are between 20 and 20,000 hertz if you have like perfect hearing, and most people, their hearing gets just damaged by existing in our loud world over time. So if you have any frequencies that are below what people can hear, they're not hearing it. It's not, you're wasting that space in the mix. And even more importantly, most speaker systems are not going to be able to play anything below a certain range, but they're going to try to play it. And it creates this warbling kind of effect, and it like fills the space of the mix without actually filling it with anything. There are lots of videos that show this online, so you can watch some examples of that, but it's super duper subtle. But particularly when you have like a final master for your mix, you'll notice that it sounds way less crowded if you do this. You just want to high pass, just roll off that low end. All the stuff that you don't need. So I'm going to go to like 30 hertz. I'm probably going to actually dial this back a little bit. Maybe I'll use this cab instead, actually. Since it's a lot more subtle, it's more like the kind of distortion that I would want. All right. Then I'm going to get into the compression. Same as with, metal bass or whatever. Any sort of relatively energetic music, you want that bass to be you know, pretty smooth, you know, really compressed. There's a thing to that, you know. I'm gonna keep it mono. I don't need it to be anything else. I'm just gonna use like the bulb bass preset as a starting point. So. And then another really important thing, I recommend, there's a plugin that I recommend that Waves sells that really helps me out. It really saves my life. Because you'll notice, because normally I would have to use like a limiter in this situation. You'll notice on here that the volume is jumping up and down all over the place. Because some of the frequencies are being EQ'd out and stuff. And you don't want that. Normally, what I would probably do is take like a limiter. Like something I've done before is take like the Fruity limiter and just be like, all right, like right here, and just limit the balls out of it. You know. So you're not getting this crazy volume changes, because you don't want the volume to jump all over the place like that. But if you can, I recommend picking up this Bass Writer plugin, because it is sick. It just automatically detects and adjusts the volume accordingly, and it sounds so much nicer. Like, I'm gonna be like the target is wherever. Set it. Yeah. Ignore high. Yeah. I don't know. I guess I haven't ever actually double checked, but I've always assumed that when it says ignore high artifacts, that ignore high or low artifacts, that means like when there's like outliers that are super duper quiet or super duper high, that it just doesn't adjust it to do anything. So I think you could do something like that. I don't know if you wanted to mess with that, but I'm just gonna do that, and you can see that the difference between and it's not just quieter, because I do have it set louder here just to make sure that it's not coloring it by being so much louder. But difference between that and like it jumps around all over the place. So this helps a ton, absolute ton. It makes your life a lot easier, and it sounds incredible in my opinion. So I've spent all this time. There's so much for making this brief. Ugh, screw me. But I spent all this time doing this. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and just make things shorter. So that I have like a reference point. Actually, let's do it on pattern 4. My bad. This is just so I like to do this so that I have like a reference point mentally. And then what I'm actually going to do is just have the bass and the drums so that I can just hear them. And then this will be done. Bass is a little bit too loud, but so that's what we got for a start, and that already sounds pretty dang punchy, honestly. If you really wanted to, you probably would be serviceable at that point. The final thing I would probably do is just throw in like a compressor, a mono compressor, so that I can sidechain it, the kick. Go ahead and use the Fruity, Fruity Peak Controller. Head over here. Just take the threshold. I'm sure we're all familiar with this, since this is a pretty common technique. But just link it to the kick, invert it, and I'm gonna probably set the ratio. I'm just gonna guesstimate like around here, something like that. I like to crank that ratio up just for a moment while I'm adjusting. You saw that there, just so that I have a really obvious idea of where the release and where the attack are at, because it's like super duper accentuated when you have the ratio really high. Like, the big trick with this is you really don't want anybody to even notice that it's being ducked at all. It's supposed to be so subtle that it's there, but it just helps. It helps bring the kick through, and it helps add a little movement to the bass. It helps kind of glue it to the bass. And if you also wanted to do a little gluing, like I always make like a kick and bass submix over here. Sometimes I'll like add a little bit of distortion just so that the bass and the kick drum have the same sort of harmonic characteristics. You know, like really subtle distortion. That's something that you can do if you wanted. If you have a bass like this, as I said, that sounds pretty okay right now. But if you wanted to make it sound a little bit more like an actual bass guitar, like one trick that you can use is to have like a pitch effect right at the start of it. Something like this. Because it, it kind of, it gives it like it makes it sound like a pick almost, is hitting the string, is kind of the way that I like to think of it. You have it pitched down really rapidly right at the start of every single sound. And then something I often do. And then if I want like a, not really a master, but if I want like a working, just a quick master, so to speak, like a lot of producers, what they'll do is they'll throw like a limiter on the master fader before they send it to their client, just so that it sounds louder, so that the client is like, oh yeah, that sounds tight, because most people don't realize how much that affects the sound of it, But if you have like a multi-band compressor, it's super duper subtle. But if I like, you'll notice I mixed everything, I composed everything at pretty high volume. Like my kicks and my snares, I put them at 0 dB. I've seen that a lot of people do that. They just start at 0 dB, and it makes your life a lot easier if you start at that point, because you're gonna have to crank it up later anyway. Because this kind of music, it's loud, and it's balls to the wall. It's obnoxious. It's not subtle, So, we're gonna go with that. Oh yeah, what was I saying? If you take like a multi-band compressor, so because it sounds super duper good, I'm gonna take where is it? Linear broadband, linear multi-band. There it is, the multi-band. This is like a mastering plugin, but I'm not even gonna do anything with it. You could also use the Fruity multi-band compressor. It doesn't really matter. I like to throw it on there. And not even do anything with it. It just like separates everything, Like just put it on like a preset that's like super duper basic. Like this is full reset, and it's literally doing like almost nothing. You can see that it's doing very, very little. And obviously this plugin will probably sound a lot better than the Fruity, the default FL Studio multi-band compressor, but that's just the way of things. But it just helps kind of separate the frequencies a little bit, and it's like a quick, easy fix if you just want to pump it out there. If you want to pump a trap song, just toss it out there so it sounds okay. I like to do that, and then I'll shut it back off like whenever I'm mixing. With these, I also like it because they have a dither option, so I can use the dithering inside of here instead of FL Studio's dithering. Not that one is necessarily better than the other, but it's different. So, hey, it is what it is. So let's hear this with the synthesizers. Now that I threw this on here, FL Studio actually decided to add a bunch of input delays all over in here. I could fix those. I think what I'm gonna do is like delayed a little bit because it's automatically adjusting the delay compensation. I would have to adjust that myself because for whatever reason with these mastering plugins, they're so intensive that it tends to throw everything out of whack. So I'd have to fix it myself. But you can hear the tonal differences. That it's a nice addition. I also would probably link some other elements of the mix to the sidechain. So, something like that. It helps to really accentuate this kick, if you have the synths and stuff duck. That way these things are not at the foreground, because really, in this kind of music, they're not supposed to be. Kick, bass, that's your bread and butter. That's what you're looking for, so. Alrighty. Thank you for watching. Hit me up if you have any questions. tell me if you think I'm dumb and I do things that are wrong. I'd be happy to talk about it. All right. See you later.